farmers to live in a community where the success of their neighbor is a threat to them, but rather in a community where the success of one is the success of all. This is what we propose on side proposition. One argument coming from our side, from in my speech, about how farmers are coerced to be parts of exploitative companies, and an extension about rural development in our second speech. But before that, a few parts of framing. Firstly, what are farmers' cooperatives? These are organizations that are governed by farmers in which they pool their resources together. For example, like mechanization, money, knowledge, and so on. They are self-governed and they market things together, they take loans together, they have shares together, they buy things together, etc., etc. And what are then agricultural companies? This is a business entity engaged in various activities related to agriculture and agricultural products, the production of food and agricultural products. Now, this motion does not apply to companies that deal exclusively with distribution. We are only breaking up the production of food. What is then the status quo and the problem? The status quo is that most of the market share, for example, from 75 to even 90%, is owned by the ABCDs, which is the biggest agricultural company, meaning that it's dominating the sectors, meaning that that a majority of farmers are then in contract with these companies. Now, these contracts tend to be very predatory because they demand a lot from the farmers, and if these demands are then not met, it means that they can take collateral or they can negotiate these contracts to even worse terms, and we believe that this is the problem. What is then our models? We think that we have two types of farmers. Firstly, the farmers who sell products. How would this look like? We think that the government would buy out farmers, they would pay severance pay so that the contracts would resolve, and this would be pretty phased out for two reasons. Firstly, we would give time for the shareholders to reinvest somewhere else, and secondly, we would give time to the farmers to organize so that these cooperatives can then be formed. Secondly, the second type of farmers that we think we have here and how would we deal with them is the wage farmers, meaning that in developing countries where they work on lands that the companies then own, we think that the governments would buy land from these companies, so now and then would give them to farmers so that this then could be their land. We think that governments usually have enough money to do this because they tend to invest in agriculture because this means that they get food from this, and we think that this is enough of incentive and that they would actually be able to do this. Then going on to our first argument about how farmers are coerced to be parts of exploitative companies and how this results in squeezing out farmers. We have 3 points of analysis here. Firstly, about the exploitation of farmers for contracts. We think that in many rural areas, farmers are in oligopolies. Why and how does this look like? Companies usually have a lot of options, so they need to be selective in which farmer they offer contracts to. This is especially bad where farming is very dominant, for example, sub-Saharan Africa. And this results in two things, which are very intertwined. Firstly, that farmers are forced to compete with each other for contracts. Why we think that this is bad? Firstly, because this is a race to the bottom, because they then accept worse terms because they need to get this contract. Secondly, this results in unsustainable practices. For example, because they want to get this contract or because they want to keep this contract, they can use pesticides that are then harmful to them. This results in land grabbing and land exhaustion because they want to be because they want to have this contract. Then, secondly, what this results in is that companies can take abuse of this and they can exploit these farmers. How does this look like? We have 3 layers here. Firstly, for example, they offer unfair contract terms which are unfavorable to the farmers. For example, like using a specific fertilizer or a specific seed, even if it's not in the best interest of the farmer, or they require a farmer to sell their products exclusively to the company at a very low price. Secondly, we think that companies usually have a monopoly. For example, a company that has a large share on the market of one particular product, they can use this power to demand lower prices from the farmers. And lastly, about the hidden costs, companies tend to offer contracts that look good on the surface, but then once the farmers are in these contracts, they realize that they have to pay a bit more or they get less pay than they were promised. For example, if a contract may require a farmer to pay shipping, for which then this means they can reduce the amount that the farmer gets at the end of this. For example, this looks like that, for example, your neighbor John is doing better 1 year than you, and you are in a contract. You are then threatened that he is going to be able to get a contract and you will not, meaning that you both can then result in using bad things and using pesticides, which is then bad for you both. Whereas on the comparative, how do co-ops look? We think that here we have a healthy competition, and because the stakes are not that high, and because you basically work together. For example, your neighbor John is now doing better than you, but this is a profit to you also, because you profit off of his good year. And because you need to work together. In a second, this basically means that it benefits both of you. Sure.
If there is a healthy competition, if the farmers are in the same cooperative, isn't it the same thing if both the farmers are in the same companies?
No, it's not the same, because in the cooperatives you both help each other, and if one profits, you also profit. In the company, if your neighbor John profits, it means that it is bad for you because it threatens you that you might lose that contract. Secondly, then, second point of analysis, how we fix this. 3 layers. Firstly, farmers don't compete together for the benefits, but rather they cooperate. They cooperate, and this means that they help each other, because if one does bad, this also means that you are going to then be shortened, because you need to use your resources to help that other farmer that is now doing bad. Secondly, we think that governments are likely to subsidize, because we're literally talking about food, and we're literally talking about big parts of the population that they need to appeal to. We think that they're going to subsidize these co-ops if they're not doing good, which removes the problem of the lack of the capital. And lastly, because we remove companies as competition to cooperatives on a global market, because in the status quo, cooperatives can't be competitive because the companies are too dominant, because they have an upper hand, because they're more powerful, and then the co-ops are usually doing bad. Now, if we implement this, this means that the cooperatives would be doing better on the global market. Then the last point of analysis about efficiency. Look, we understand that there may be less efficiency, or that there may be even less food and less produce, because there's going to be less pressure on these farmers. We concede to that. But why do we think that this is not part of this debate, and why do we think that it's not that important? Three reasons here. Firstly, because we already in the status quo have a lot of food, we have enough food. 60% of food is actually thrown away in the status quo. We think that this is a big deal. Secondly, companies waste a lot of food intentionally to keep their prices higher. For example, France burns a lot of their grain so that they can keep prices in the supermarkets higher. And lastly, because we think that only the West is then going to be hurt, we don't think that on the local level, people are actually going to be hurt, because these companies are going to be able to provide food on the local level, because this is literally their job. Then, if we weigh this, why do we think that this is more important? We don't want farmers to suffer in bad contracts. We don't want them to be exploited, but we would rather rather that there is less food and less efficiency in the world. We concede to that. Then, before I finish this speech, who exactly do we help? Firstly, we help the wage workers, because they have their own land, they are able to operate on it however they want, and they have the benefits of cooperating with other farmers so that they can help each other. Secondly, we also help the farmers who sell produce, because now they have the freedom to choose who exactly they sell to, how they sell to, and so on. We think that this is best for the farmers. If you don't want farmers to be exploited, please vote side proposition.
Speakers go for 7 minutes and 57 seconds. Thank you for the speech. We invite the first speaker from South Africa.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Our world is facing some extremely difficult challenges. For example, how we feed millions of people in poverty, and how to deal with climate change, and how we grapple with the moral issues of animal production. And to these challenges, Proposition suggests we put all our eggs in one single basket: cooperatives. In opposition, we do not deny that cooperatives might have something useful to bring to the table, but we think that companies do so just as well. I'll be doing 4 things in my speech today. Firstly, I will clarify our stance. Secondly, I will rebut some of the things Team Proposition had to say. Thirdly, I will provide you with my substantive arguments about financial resilience and effective operations. And my second speaker will provide some further principled analysis and an argument about accountability. Okay, so in our stance, what do we tell you? In opposition, we do not necessarily oppose farmers' cooperatives existing, but we support the status quo where agricultural companies and farmers' cooperatives can both coexist, and will highlight the particular advantages that companies bring. If Proposition wants to point to particular issues they have with companies, we question why they can't deal with this by sensible regulations. Certainly, if PROP has the fiat to restructure such a large industry altogether, we also have the fiat to ensure basic regulations. Now I'll be moving on to rebuttal. So we have two responses to their model. Firstly, it is a good intention, but far too unrealistic. Two, in their model, they simply cannot get private investment and financial resilience. The reality is that this is simply not true. The entire point of a cooperative is that they are owned and operated by farmers, with profits going back to farmers. And if cooperatives are getting private investments, those private investors would probably want a profit return or some say over the business. And this surely undermines any benefit PROP might have on farmers' wages or authority over the business. And even if, let's say, they are getting better investments in their worst case scenario, we still have to be comparative. Companies get far more investment, which means that they are more resilient to challenges and can spend more money on hiring experts and innovating. And the second thing we have to say is about their arguments when they say that farmers have better rights under their side. Well, what we say to that is that farmers have more state cooperatives, all right, sure, but it is unclear why they are better off. There are many benefits for working for a company, including job security and not dealing with the stress of running a cooperative. And even if some farmers are better off under cooperatives, PROP denies them a choice. In our world, we're telling you both can exist, and farmers choose what works best for them. Even if PROP wins this point on farmers, right? This is not the most important issue in this debate. Farmers are a fairly smart stakeholder. Our side ensures sustainable and secure agricultural production for millions of people all around the world, and this is what is most important. Now I'll be moving on to my first argument. So agricultural companies have stronger financial resilience for three reasons. Firstly, companies are far more likely to have reserve capital. The reality is private investors have little to no incentive to invest in a cooperative if the majority or all profits are going back to the farmers. What does this mean? This means that the majority of funding available has to come from farmers. On the other hand, companies with private investments are unlikely to use this all at once, allowing reserves to be deployed when necessary. Secondly, companies also have the ability to cross-subsiding. This means that if a company has a number of subparts, more successful parts of the business can support areas that are performing less well. Comparatively, while cooperatives are made up of different farmers, it's deeply unclear if a successful farmer will be able to fund and support a struggling farmer. And thirdly, additionally, in the worst case scenarios, companies are more likely to be known to this public and governments, which means that they are far more likely to be bailed out in times of crisis. Now, impact. Why are we telling you that this is important? Well, simply because the agricultural industry is one of the most volatile and explosive industries in the world. Things like extreme weather events and diseases can threaten agricultural products every single day. Financial resilience is crucial to be able to deal with these situations in the best ways, whether it be to replace machinery, to replant crops, and so on. Otherwise, millions of vulnerable consumers miss out on farming products they so desperately rely on. My second argument now is that companies have more effective and efficient operations. Now, before jumping into this argument, it is important to understand that companies will often be much larger than cooperatives. And this is because cooperatives only get their benefits. For example, individuals, farmers having a voice in decision making if they don't expand too much. Comparatively, companies do not have this restriction, and this is seen in the status quo, where most local cooperatives consist of a few hundred members, and regional cooperatives are more rare. Now, noting this, agricultural companies offer three key benefits. One, innovation and quality. Because of their size and the financial capacity I explained earlier, companies are able to do a couple unique things. Firstly, they can offer the most competitive conditions and salaries to attract the best people with the best expertise possible. And this is not only in farming, but other areas like marketing, international trade, IT, and so on. Secondly, they can invest a lot more money in innovation and new ideas. Companies basically have a clearer incentive to innovate in sustainable areas, both because they can capture markets with new products, but also because there is increasing products or companies to become more green. And we have seen this in our status quo, whether it be regrow agriculture coming up with new methods to improve soil quality, or even neutral food going completely carbon-free, or do good food repurposing grocery waste into chicken feed. Now, what does this impact? This expertise basically means we get better products and ways of reaching consumers, as well as new innovations to deal with the many challenges that agricultural industry faces. 2, there is the economy of scale, which is another benefit of size, which means that companies are able to operate on an economy of scale. Essentially, what does this mean? This means that companies can produce in high volume, reducing the individual cost of each product and other startup costs, such as machinery, which is very expensive. Additionally, as I mentioned in my financially resilience argument, companies are also more likely to have different key elements of their business, which they can use in the operations. For example, if they also own a transport company, they can use it in their products to product out the markets more cheaply. And what is this impact? The benefit is incredibly important. We cannot stress this enough. It means some of the world's most vulnerable productions have cheaper food and products on their tables. And 3, speed and consistency in decision making. And the final benefit is that companies can operate more quickly and consistently throughout. And this is a key feature of cooperatives is that they prioritize things like consensus decision making amongst farmers. This feature is critical to getting their impacts around having a say and a lot more things. Comparatively, what do we tell you? Is that companies often have a clearer chain of command through their leadership, and this has 2 implications. 1, cooperatives are likely to make decisions a lot slower as they need to get agreement from everyone involved, and 2, companies are more likely to have consistent and predictable decisions. And what is this impact? When you are dealing with a crisis, for example, when deciding what to do in an environmental disaster, being able to respond quickly is very important. Consistency is also important as people who are resilient on cooperatives need to be able to predict decisions. Panel. On our side, the coexistence of agricultural companies and farmers' cooperatives being for thriving and agricultural world. Let's choose a path for a brighter, prosperous, and sustainable future in agricultural, benefiting farmers and consumers alike. That is why we are so proud to oppose.
English for 8 minutes and 17 seconds. We thank the speaker for the speech. We invite the second speaker from side proposition.
Panel, when the majority of cocoa bean production is still under mechanized, when the majority of farmers live in horrible conditions, when the majority of farmers struggle to get fertilizers which are correct for their land, we don't think that companies are the essential and good choice for them. Firstly, let's deal with 2 strategical things that side of opposition misses on this. Firstly, they never engage with our preemptive. When Eva in her first proposition speech explains to you as to how efficiency isn't something that is to be regarded within this debate, insofar as 60% of the food is wasted within supply chains, so obviously the problem must be elsewhere and not within the production of food. They come up here then and also say, but we will regulate these big companies. We think that we lack the structural ability to do that, insofar as these are multinational corporations where it is very hard to then put regulations on them because they don't exist within specific states, or generally because they have more power within these states. Because when an entire company is pouring in and is paying 70% of your farmers, we think that it is structurally very hard for you to legally battle them, because it means that they're going to lobby you, that they have a giant degree of profit within your country being dependent on them, so that means that you're structurally unable to do that. We think that we can do that far better on our side of the house. Then let's go on to one of the main presumptions of their case, which is that for some reasons, cooperatives and companies can coexist. We think that we already give you reasons in our first proposition speech as to how this is unlikely, but let's further extend this so we are very strong and very clear on this push that this isn't something that can happen within the developing world. 1, we already tell you that you have a power asymmetry within these companies and cooperatives, right? Let me further illustrate this. It's just generally that you have a company which has far more resources than a farmers cooperative, which means that they can grant a lease to farmers for some time, which is even more profitable profitable than cooperatives, which means that the cooperative within this region is not able to form, but then they are locked within this contract. At some point, they cannot leave, meaning that you already have this power asymmetry going on, and you don't which means that it is impossible to form a farmers cooperative. Furthermore, we think that it is likely that these companies are likely wanting to bust these cooperatives insofar as they they steal their profit and so on. Secondly then, we think that there is no help to set up cooperatives within the status quo currently being present. We think that as a farmer it is very hard for you to form this because it means that you need to convince all members of your communities which are all farmers within your community to form this cooperative. This creates a collection action problem because it means that you have to convince everybody to take a certain degree of risk, right? It means that you have to convince every single farmer within your area to that this is going to be a good thing to do. We don't think that this is something, no thank you, that we can do. This already proves that their arguments are quite that their negation to our argument are quite inefficient insofar as they do not prove that these are two things which can coexist. Lastly then, let's deal with their two arguments. Firstly, on the push about how companies have a larger mass of money and therefore can invest more. We have 4 responses to this. One, we tell you that sure they do have more money, but they have self-opposition never provides us a reason as to why they would want to invest. We think that many times within developing countries, it is literally cheaper to have certain things be done by hand because the mechanization required to, for example, pick cocoa beans is really expensive and really difficult to make. So it is probably then likely that you're going to just want to keep the people doing that. Secondly then, we think that we could also invest within cooperatives on our side of the house. They never explained to us as to how farming is not going to be a lucrative practice on our side of the house anymore, and when we have cooperatives as the only thing that you can invest in, we think that probably people are going to still pour money into this. Because you still think that, oh, I can make some money from cocoa beans or from coffee because this is something that still people buy. Thirdly then, we think that just generally, if we want to talk about states of crisis, about crises coming up in farming, we think that the state is likely to support these people. Because you have an incentive as the government to support farmers insofar as it is literally the primary sector which means that you have food in your country, which means that you are a self-sufficient state, right? We think that states then are likely to pour in money, companies, fourthly then, are likely to leave. We think that companies have no incentive, I'll take you right after this, have no incentive to help farmers when they are in danger. Because they can just move to another place, because they can just find land elsewhere, and we're pretty sure that EVA already preempts you this, because this is literally an additional mechanism as to how you have more competition between farmers. You're more likely to exhaust your land, and then the company is likely to leave, leaving you without anything, so already on their point of investing, they fail. Before I move on to the last point of negation, go ahead with
You speak how on our side of the world we are unfair and morally wrong, but you're saying that you will completely deny farmers the choice to do what they want, either if they want to be in cooperatives or in companies.
We think that farmers don't fundamentally have a choice to be in cooperatives or within companies. We tell you that already in our first speech that they are locked into these agreements with companies, and Eva gives you very clear analysis as to how this happens, as to how you are squeezed out. We don't think that there is an argument of choice to be made here. Lastly then, on research and development, very quickly. One, companies don't do the majority of research on this. It is usually the universities, such as the agro-business universities within the United States of America. This is likely to be done because you as a state already have an incentive to be green, to have farming in your within your state to be as best as possible. Secondly then, they still give us zero reasons as to why you would want to prioritize research and development within developing states. Because they give, presumably that would make the farming more expensive, which you don't as a company, which has a lot of selfish profit incentives, want to do. Lastly, let's move on to our extension about local development and how we get rurally better. We think that cooperatives create more development because they have special incentives to care for local development. Because they are localized, because we can see that not many farmers are going to be within them, but also because they want to focus on regional development because many farmers live within these areas, right? You use the roads within your region, your kids go to these schools. Then we think that they improve this on 3 levels. One, because of local specialization. Look, here we're literally engaging with the best case where you don't have the best accountants and the best marketing. Because that means that you're going to hire accountants and marketing within your local region. You're going to have people doing things for you that come from your local area. Which means that you then specialize your area a lot more because you have these accountants, because you have this marketing. This never happens on side of opposition because they are all locked away in some big city that the employed for some multinational company, right? Then already we have more local jobs being created. We also have more specialized rural development, right? This means that it's easier for within these rural areas to start a business, but furthermore, it is also easier for you to get a job as somebody who is specialized. This is a massive benefit of an impact. And here we go literally on the best ground where we will tell you that efficiency isn't that important, and you're probably not going to have the best management, but it still means that you are going to have rural development. Secondly then, upon knowledge sharing and reinvesting, we think that just generally farmers cooperatives function in a way where they pool knowledge, right? They pool the way of what you are supposed to do with that land, and you are unlikely to share this knowledge outside of opposition. Because if you can get ahead of another farmer, it means that you are then more likely to score with the company is more likely to pay you. Then with us you get literally a direct benefit when you share knowledge with another farmer, because it is literally you, because the other farmer like literally profits from you, because they get a certain amount of your profits back to them, back into this pool of money which is created with cooperatives. This generally means that you have a better use of land, which is also more sustainable, because you have only this land as a farmer and you probably don't want to over farm it. Companies are likely to force you to do that. Because of all of these reasons, because you care for rural local development, because you don't care about the efficiency of food production, vote proposition.
Thank you, speakers, for the speech. We invite the second speaker from side opposition.
May I take a picture?
Grow Intelligence, is an agriculture company that is specialized in AI-driven agricultural updates. They do all that to deal with all those issues around food security. And there's also this other one, it's called AGG. It's an agriculture and biotech startup that is developing those seeds, special seeds, that can help all those malnutrition. Those are all just some examples of the advancements that are happening within all those agriculture companies. So why take that away? So in my speech today, I will mainly be doing two things. First, I will rebut and deplore some of the arguments, and then I will provide some further principles analysis and arguments about accountability. So first of all, what did we hear from the proposition today? They first came with this argument of the exploitation of contracts. Our first speaker already showed you why it is not always bad in our work and why those companies can care. But also, what did they come with? They come with this idea of just competitiveness, saying that we have more competitiveness within those companies. So what do we tell you? We tell you that please just be clear. Yes, there is competitiveness, but competitiveness between those people working in this company and people working within this company. Just like there is competitiveness between people in this cooperative and people in this cooperatives. And because cooperatives are at like little scales, that means that we will have even more competitiveness, because we have a lot better people in this cooperative, better people in this cooperative, as opposed to a company that is bigger and that in most cases have more people within it. They also started talking about how we will not have enough jobs, when in the same time they're characterizing the companies are bigger than the cooperatives. So we just want you to ask you, please give us a simple characterization of those. Also, we want to tell you that those people that work within companies do care for the growth of the company. Because you know what? It is not, the companies think about that. They think about the people that are working for them. Therefore, they know that they want to give them this incentive because they want the company to grow bigger. Therefore, they give them more money if the products are better. And then they start to talk about this idea of unsustainability and how we will just be using and like having those bad products. But what we tell you is three responses. First, you know what? Companies care about their consumers, because if they get some bad product, a product that is as they are stating, then they will be losing those consumers. Secondly, we already have regulations. If they are selling stuff that are harmful, then there is the law that is protecting the people. And then we tell you that actually that is happening more in cooperatives than in companies, because in the companies we have more accountable, that we will be proving later. Then they started talking about how the harm within the farmers outweighs the food. So we will just, the efficiency of the food. So we will just take them at their best case scenario, okay? We assume that yes, companies are so bad for the farmers, and we tell you that, you know what, we still believe that the efficiency of food is important, and that's for four main reasons. First, because you know what, it is just wrong to say that we don't need food in this world. It is wrong because there are people dying from hunger in Africa, and the characterization that is given, there is just a characterization of those developed world. Maybe they are not living in the same world that we are living in, but we are living in Africa. We are living seeing people that don't have enough money, enough food. We are talking about countries that do exist and are still exporting, and because they don't have developed economy, they cannot export as much, and people are still dying from hunger. That is the fact. They start to talk about France and how people are burning food, but we tell you that first, that happened within France, a developed country, and second, that also was done by cooperatives just making research. Then they start to talk about how we want to tell you that, you know what, even if it's right, even if we don't have this need, we tell you that the world is changing. We tell you that we have climate change and that we are not sure. We should be sure that we have some kind of efficiency. That is something that is important, because we cannot sure that we cannot be sure that what is happening now is what is going to be happening. Then they start, and we also tell you that yes.
Notice on how your side you have agricultural companies which are exporting food to the developed world. Cooperatives have no incentive to do that insofar as it is literally, as you frame it, hunger within the local regions.
Okay, thank you. So what we tell you is that, please, see how companies are working. Companies can be in those underdeveloped countries, okay? Companies are, when we are talking about companies existing, we are talking about them existing in all the world. So what is happening is that we will be having companies in the underdeveloped world. It doesn't always mean that the companies are going to be in those developed countries just exported to the underdeveloped world. They came and just talked and just focus on how the government will be solving all the problems. My God, the amount of money that the government is having is just so big. The government is going to be solving the problem of food. The government is going to be solving every kind of problem that is happening. Then we tell you, if the government can do that, why aren't they doing it now? Moving on to our argument. We tell you, panel, that there are two key principal harms that arise from the proposed policy. First, this is a violation of the property rights, because the agricultural companies that exist today, they exist because of the significant investment of every individual that have put this into these companies. The effect of this policy is that they will lose the real value of this investment, regardless of what profitable may be. This principle is important, and that's for two reasons. First, because these individuals have invested legitimately and had a reasonable expectation that they would not be deprived of this investment. And second, because secure property rights are a centerpiece of most countries, and people rely on them when deciding to make important economic decisions. Secondly, we tell you that PROP also denies a principled right to another group they claim to care about, which are the farmers, because in the status quo, farmers have the choice about whether they want to farm or join cooperative or work for agricultural companies. It's a choice that they will be taken from them, because you know what? They won't have that choice. Even if PROP think that they are better off under the companies and the cooperatives, the state should not make that decision for them. They tell us that they can't convince all those people to join the cooperatives. But what now? You are just gonna make them do that? Yeah, it's harder to convince them, just make them do that? Then we tell you that there are a number of legitimate reasons in the status quo that pushes those farmers to want to work for those agricultural companies, including job security and avoiding all the stress of running a business. My second argument is that companies are actually more accountable, and this argument is simple. Companies are actually more likely to have their operation inspected, and this for a few reasons. Because part of the procedures, by their very nature, they are likely to have those practices like regularly reporting to shareholders on their operation and finances. Comparatively, the farmers' cooperatives are generally only accountable to each other, so which is lesser rules that are removed the third party of shareholders. Then we tell you about security, about their size. Yes, companies are bigger, which means that they are more likely to be known to the public, media, and government. By contrast, cooperatives are likely to be numerous and smaller in size, attracting far less attention. And then there's groupthink, which also go back to sharing the knowledge. We tell you that there are many different people and interests in a company, which yes, we acknowledge that in the cooperative we don't have only farmers, but cooperatives are centered around those farmers. Therefore, we are more likely to have a majority of those farmers. Therefore, we are more likely to adopt this groupthink. Therefore, we tell you that we won't have that much innovation. We won't have that much accountability within them. And the impact practices very clearly, but while both sides have capacity to cause harm, bad practices are far more likely to be exposed and addressed on our side. And it's for all those reasons I would proudly oppose this motion. Thank you.
We invite the third speaker from side opposition.
Panel, currently in the world we produce so much food we don't know what to do with it, right? I don't think the prioritization of efficiency makes sense at the point at which you have farmers working in absolutely horrible conditions, right? Two questions I want to go over in my speech. Firstly, about where farmers are better off, and about then, secondly, development of rural areas. But first, the thing that I want to do is clarify this problem of efficiency, right? Because we don't even think it is a clash. Firstly, the opposition is talking about such things as food shortages and climate change, right? But they lack the characterization of where those shortages happen, right? We don't think this is like in the developed world, right? We think this is happening in the developing world. The problem then is that companies would, on their side of the house, prefer just exporting more food to the developed world when they can sell it for way higher of a price, right? Rather than like distribute it equally and earn more. The problem is not about how much food we produce, the problem is where we export it to, right? Now, how co-ops actually fix this on our side of the house, as we mentioned in our second speech, right? You see these problems happening in your regional area, like you see if there's a problem with food, right? So how you actually now have the incentive to fix this, right? Because you see this in your local community, you want to help the people, right? Whereas on the side of opposition, you can. No, thank you. Why? Because we've already mentioned in our first about the contracts, right? You have to sell exclusively to your company, right? You don't have the choice to do anything else when you're under the company. Whereas on our side of the house, co-ops have the ability to sell to the distributors, but also take care more of the regional community, right? This is how we think we solve this. Now on to our first question of this debate about the farmers, right? Opposition tells you that the companies give you job security and that they can really support weak branches. We think that this is completely unrealistic characterization, right? How? A company has to be efficient to remain competitive on the market. This is why we think it's unlikely that you will ever want to take care of your least profitable branch or of your least profitable farmer, because simply if the problem is one farmer, you can pick another one. The contract is lasts maximally like 2 years, and then you can simply put another. We've done lots of analysis on this on our first speech. But then secondly, about moving your production, right? We think this is actually very easily to do, especially because ABCs are mostly present like in the developing world. The characterization that the side op is missing, that mostly farming there is under mechanized, right? This means that you as a company don't have to move any like infrastructure, any mechanization, right? Because in the status quo, you're rather exploiting manual labor in the developing world rather than invest in it actually, right? This is why this tackles their point also about like a mechanization being offered by companies, right? We just don't think that this is the status quo because they prefer just exploitation, which only pumps up our impact on how bad it is currently for the farmers. Yes.
You know that exploitation means transportation. Why do you think that companies wouldn't choose the cheaper way, which is basically to be there in the local area and provide it and create the job there?
The thing is that this is not the cheaper option, right? Because they have underpaid workers that can't unionize, they can't have like nobody speaking on behalf of their rights, they can exploit them more, right? The regulations, we've already tackled about this, right? It's very difficult to regulate companies in such areas, right? We think that it's like for the companies, it's way cheaper to just exploit manual labor rather than invest and teach the people how to use this machinery, right? We think that mechanization mostly happens in the developed world. For example, in America, right, when you produce a lot of grain and it's all mechanized, right? This is not happening in the developing world when farmers are suffering the most. But then the second thing under discussion that I want to talk about is about then how farmers are actually better on our side of the house, right? We think it's not thank you. We think it's clear that farmers on our side of the house help each other instead of compete, right? And we don't think that like any competition or like a farmer doing worse on our side of the house actually means they lose the incentive to help.
Why? Every farmer has at least some resources, right? If we're talking about cooperatives, you have to pool all the resources in together. And don't let opposition tell you that like a few poor farmers cannot pool together and make a functioning cooperative, because every single one of them has some resources, and then all of them together can get easier loans, right? They can't do this individually, which means that they're just left exploited under companies, right? But secondly then, no thank you, we think that you're also unlikely to not help a farmer in a cooperative, because you never know. One year your farm might be doing better, but the next year his farm is going to be doing better, and then you're gonna have to depend on him a bit more. This is why farmers are quite aware of this, right? And they're likely to help each other. The response to this on the side of opposition is that this means that we will have competition amongst cooperatives, right? But we don't think that this is actually bad, because this means that we just have more cooperatives, which means that we can negotiate easier, right? Because they have more bargaining power. How this changes, let me illustrate. So on the side of opposition, right, you have one farmer that is basically coerced into dealing with a company because they don't have access to even talk to distribution, and the distribution wouldn't care about them because they're one single farmer, right? This means that they have zero bargaining with the company, which means that they're likely to be exploited, right? And this also means that the company takes a lot of profit that the farmer could have if this was directly towards distribution and then towards the market. So how is this then better on our side of the house, right? Because you have more farmers in a cooperative and more cooperatives, no thank you, you gain bargaining power, right? This is the first thing. And the second thing, because we also cut down the middleman, because there is no more company, right? The distribution now has to bargain directly with you, right? This means that you get more profit because it's not taken up by the company from you, right? This means then, one thing, just that the farmers get more profit, right? The farmers are easier to take care of them, which means that even if you have like poorer farmers right now, they actually on our side of the house get this more money that they get from cutting down the middleman, right? And then, so let me just like do some quick weighing then about how they're actually better on our side of the house, right? And here I also want to deal about the principle of choice, right? Because we think we've already proven to you that there is actually no choice in the status quo, because farmers, cooperatives, and companies can't actually coexist and work functionally, right? And at the point at which they can't coexist, you can't really have a choice to go to a cooperative because you're aware that you will probably be worse off, right? But when on our side of the house, we remove this company as competition on the market, you're able to freely then choose a cooperative because you know it's going to be functioning better, right? So then I want to talk about the second thing there, about the development of rural areas, right? The opposition, no thank you, the only response that the opposition really gives us here is that, oh no, we won't like land exploit because companies are aware that like they have to have like healthy products, right? We don't think that this fundamentally engages with our arguments, right? Because we tell you about how companies have the incentive to exhaust land. Why? Because the moment that they stop exploiting this land, right, they lose competitive advantage over other companies, right? That's why we think it's unlikely that any company will start using up the land better, right? We don't think that this is possible. However, on our side of the house, when you do have cooperatives, right, they're way more present in the land, and they also don't have to do such like large production, right? They're not so pressured with this competitiveness to be this efficient, which means that they don't have to exhaust the land to that large of an extent, right? And we think that this is really, really good, because this means we get more sustainable practices, and we can easier than like produce things sustainably and like not like, because there's like no necessity in the status quo, right, to overproduce because we have too much food, as we like already explained. But then important things to point out about like what the side of opposition doesn't really engage in is how we tell you that this gets us rural development, right? Because right now in the status quo, you have like one office in like a city, and it has the concentration of all the knowledge, right? No, thank you. However, on the side of proposition, then this moves to more local areas. This moves to the rural areas, right? This means that even if this like new account that is now going to be saturated in like a small village is not going to be as efficient. Number one, we've already told you we don't have a need for efficiency. But secondly, we prefer this happening. For all of those reasons, no problem.
We invite the third speaker from side opposition.
continent where agriculture is one of, if not the most important field. I live in a continent where, if not for cheap food that agricultural companies provide, millions of people wouldn't be able to survive. In this debate, we have three clashes. First, on principle, second, on exploitation, and then third, on efficiency. Starting with the first clash on principle. So what does proposition tell us in this clash? They give us this model about how they would sever companies. Well, what we tell you then is that this is first a violation of property rights, but then second, individuals lose value of their investment regardless of props model, because then they are stopping their source of revenue. But then third, we also tell you that this is also against the right to choice and security and job security, and not having less stress from running a cooperative that a farmer does have. So, but they tell us that there is no choice on our side, because then they tell us that there is no choice on our side for a farmer to choose cooperatives or companies. What we tell you is that is untrue. Why is that? Because we, on our world, we have, in status quo, we have 1.2 million cooperations. They are not, obviously, they are not squished by companies, or there would be much less of them. But then cooperations, as proposition is claiming, are pretty easy to set up. If they can set it up, if they can somehow sever companies and give time to shareholders or whatever their model is, if they can do that, then we can tell you that co-ops are pretty much easy to set up in our world. But then even if cooperations are not easy to set up, even if cooperations do not exist in our world, even if farmers actually only have to work in agricultural companies, we tell you that this gives us better and cheaper products because of research and efficiency on our side. So what does this mean? This means for us that there is much more incentive for companies to go through research. Why is that? First reason about their incentive is that it would lead to more. Is that they have the pressure by the government to give more job security, to give more food security. So proposition tells us in their speeches about how the government have an incentive to help cooperatives in case of a crisis to assure, because they have the incentive to assure food security. What we tell you then is that if government has this incentive on their side, then they also have this incentive on our side to make sure that they put regulations to make sure that this goal is fulfilled. But then second, it is also less costs in the long run. It is more product in less amount of time. This is what we give on our side. This is what research give on our side. The proposition may be claiming that research is way too expensive, but in the long run, it gets more profit to companies, and at the same time, it gives more food security to the people, and that is why it is very important. But then they also tell us about how companies will have monopolies, meaning they could have higher prices. Again, going back to the point about how government have all these incentives to give money from their pockets to cooperatives to make sure that they have food security. Then we also tell you that they also have the incentive to put down those regulations, meaning they put down those regulations because they are much simpler. Why would they go ahead and sever all companies and do all the give all this model when they could simply put regulations, which is much simpler and also aligns with their interests and their incentives according to proposition. Second clash about exploitation. Proposition tells us about how farmers are likely to accept worse terms. We tell you that that is untrue because when cooperatives also exist on our side, but more than that, farmers have more say under cooperatives, yes, but it is unclear why they are always better off. There are many benefits for working in a company, including, as we told you, job security, not dealing with the stress of running a cooperative, and even if some farmers are better off under cooperatives, proposition denies them the choice. In our world, both can exist, and farmers can choose what works for them individually. Even if proposition wins on this point of farmers, this is not the most important issue in the debate, because farmers are a fairly small stakeholder, as we have told you. They do not matter compared to the bigger picture of people not getting enough food.
Point?
Yes.
Notice that farmers literally make up 60 or even more percent of the population of people of sub-Saharan Africa, or people of Southeastern Asia, or people of South America. These are really big stakeholders. You can't just say that they're not.
Well, people who consume the food made by these agricultural companies make up 100% of the world population. So it is a much bigger stakeholder than what proposition claims, and that is why we are putting them above, but not exactly neglecting farmers, as we have given you reasons why they would also be regarded in our world because of all the regulations that government has the incentive to make. But then what we also tell you is about how agricultural companies have very strong internal and external pressure to have sustainable practices, be it on the farmer side or on the land side. This includes shareholders, media, and NGOs, and as proposition claims, the government. Importantly, corporate social responsibility is an incredibly strong incentive and movement for companies to face intense backlash if they don't abide by these norms. It's also unclear why these practices would exist. So if a company ruins the land that they work in, they no longer have land to farm. So the incentive for farmers and companies to keep the land is pretty much the same. So if farmers have the incentive to take care of their land, then so would companies. It's also, even if these practices do exist, governments can regulate and outlaw them, as we have told you. But then they tell us about how competition is dangerous on our side between different farmers. And we tell you that that is not true, because competition is very necessary on our side, because it gives better quality, it gives lesser prices, and more than that, we also have mitigation of risks. So the reason they give us about why competition is dangerous is because when farmers go into a tough spot, then another farmer can help them. Well, we have that because we have job security, and a company is not likely to simply kick out a farmer from a day to another, since we also have those regulations. So the benefits that they get are also existent on our side. But then they tell us about locals, about development in rural areas, and what we tell you is that companies, again, are still using the same land, but what we told you also is that there is no competition on their side, meaning what that would mean is that there actually be less development in rural areas, because how does this development happen? It happens with better quality and with lesser prices in these places. But then on the third clash, on efficiency. So they tell us about how cooperatives are less efficient because they have less pressure, and that would mean that they have less food. So, and they tell us also about how that doesn't matter because a lot of food is thrown out. What we tell you is that the surplus is not thrown out because people have enough food and they can't eat more. The surplus of food is thrown out because of the very wrong distribution of food. So what this would mean, if the surplus exists on our side, it's not because people don't need the food. And if the surplus exists on our side, the propositions model will not solve this. Kicking out the surplus or throwing out the surplus is not an issue that is created by agricultural companies specifically, but it is an issue that would exist on both sides. And reducing food would actually make it so that even less people get to have the food that they desperately need. And that is why we think that this clash is very important, and we win this debate. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
We will now move to reply speeches. We invite the opposition reply speaker.
Today, the proposition has made a very strategic mistake, which is basically to agree that we will have more efficiency and more effective in our world for creating food. So they agree that we will be more able to sustain and have a food that is sustainable, and about what they try to do is basically to just outweigh that, just to say that that is not important. Just because some rich people, because yes, we tell you that the percentages that are given and the people that are throwing the food are actually the people that do not need it, as they are stating. Therefore, we tell you that yes, if there is surplus, it is within the rich people, but it is not the case within the poor people. The poor people that are still needing food, that still need food to be cheap, a food that is cheap and that is only provided by the companies, as we have proven to you. So, first of all, before getting into the clashes, I want to state that there are two main points that the proposition have not at all engaged with. First, the accountability. Did we hear anything from them? No, they just assumed it, so we won on that. Secondly, the principle of all those people that have been for so years investing and working to grow up those companies that are just gonna be losing that are gonna and have those expectations and are gonna be just losing all those expectations and therefore not having what they were expecting and what the country and what the system have been promising them. Did they engage on that? No. So just on those main points, we believe we have won this debate. Therefore, they have only been focusing on the farmers. So let's engage on the farmers. What do we have? We have a word in the proposition when they don't have a choice, when they are just pushed into those cooperatives with the stress of running it, with the unreliability, and with just not knowing what is going on. With those cooperatives that are, as they had shown them, most of the time smaller, therefore most of the time do not have that much gain, therefore most of the time won't be able to make that much change or any change that they are setting in the local community. And what do we have in our word, in the opposition's word? We have a choice. A choice that they try to neglect by just stating that we don't have cooperative, which is just a wrong statement because we already have 1.2 million. We have 12% of the population of the world that is already working within cooperatives. So just stating that was just not right. Then we tell you because they have that choice of taking that risk, of going into those cooperatives or of creating one if it is so simple as the proposition is stating, or to join one if they think they are not in the place that they think is good for them. Or they can go to those companies that do give them a lot of advantages, companies that that are stable and give them this job security. So we believe that on that point of farmers, the point that is so important to our dear proposition, we have also won. Then they started talking about the local development. What we told you is what the proposition have failed to understand is that yes, those companies can invest and will invest in those underdeveloped areas, and thus for two main reasons. First, because we have a lot of lands there, okay? We have a lot of places to cultivate, and it is just cheaper to be near the place and than to have all those transportation, as we have stated in our POI, but also because, as they have stated, we have cheaper human resources. That means that yes, maybe they are not skilled, but let me just ask you, what is simple to just form those people or form those people, which is just going to be a bit of investment and have this cheap human resource, or in the other hand, go to those developed world with those very expensive human resources. And this is for all those reasons that we believe has won this debate. Thank you.
4 minutes and 10 seconds. We thank the speaker for the speech. We will now move to the proposition of time speaker.
We were pretty clear this entire debate. We told you very simply that a happy village leads to a happy life and that farmers are now all going to join hands on our side of the house. Firstly then, let's deal with two strategic implications and two strategic mistakes which side opposition makes in this debate. One, they don't engage very well. The majority of their engagement, which is nuanced, comes in third opposition, but still they're running a parallel debate insofar as they don't respond to the previous responses we gave to their arguments, right? They rely on the status quo too much because they say that, in this sense, the government must be parallel in the incentives that they get. One, we already gave you reasons as to why cooperatives are likely to be more cared for insofar as they are all regional, because it is harder for you to bargain with companies. But secondly then, we think that just generally, this also proves that cooperatives and companies cannot engage with each other or that they're regionally locked out of each other. Sure, 1.2 million cooperatives exist in the status quo, but they don't exist in the same regions as companies. We're pretty clear from that from the start. Secondly then, is the strategic problem that we have with that principle push. They don't engage with the practical within this push, right? They give us a principle on property, but never properly engage as to how it still applies to our model, even when you have time to reinvest, even when you have all of these mitigations still going on. Secondly then, on their choice. We give you a very clear characterization how this is not a choice, and they never deal with this very well, right? Then we think that their principal push is something that is out of this debate, or rather something that is maybe a marginal impact on side of opposition. but we have two main issues in this debate that you need to care more about. One, upon farmer life. We think that farmers live better on Arsenal House. This was our main push, and we were very clear on this. Let's give some way as to why we care about this stakeholder the most. One, they're literally the most vulnerable. Farmers are literally the poorest people on the planet, currently paid less than $1 in the majority of countries. Secondly, then, we think that it's still a huge amount of people which are living under the poverty line, which are farmers, so obviously an increase of their life quality is an increase of a massive amount of people. Thirdly, then, we think that we gave you a huge impact here. This is not a small margin as to food prices getting a bit more expensive. This is literally people being able to fundamentally live better, to make choices about the land they live on, to be able to then sustain of themselves of their land and not have to part cocoa beans. This is the most important weighing in this debate because it proves that our argument in this debate ultimately do not fall, not that they are the most important winners the entire round. Then they have within this push two pushes. One, that they say that, oh, you're going to have security. Let's engage on the highest ground and say that you have, as a farmer, a large degree of security within farmers, within these companies. One, we think that yes, you have security in bad conditions, so we don't necessarily recognize as to why this is a valid impact. Secondly then, this literally pushes our own narrative because it says that cooperatives are unlikely to form, or it is very hard for them to form because you are afraid of losing the security, even though cooperatives may be able to provide that, insofar as there are literally 1.2 million of them in the status quo. This is literally a push for Arsenal House. Then they will give us another push here about regulation. The response here is that we tell you that it's a lot harder to do when you have companies because they are a multinational corporation. Because of all of these reasons, we think we deal with this efficiently. Lastly then, let's deal with the clash on food production. We were very clear from the beginning that we don't think this is a valid clash, and we give you a lot of reasons, one, as to how this is not an important clash, because literally 60% of food currently produced in the world is wasted, and then we think this is not something that is a fault of the farmers, and it's not something that should be dealt in this way, but it's something which should be dealt on the food industry. And secondly then, we tell you that even if you have slightly less production, it is going to hurt people in the West anyway. You're going to have bananas which are a bit more expensive in the West, because thirdly, we can flip this clash in our favor. You literally, as a farmer, care most about your rural region, and we give you an entire argument about this. Why would you want to let them starve? You're probably then going to farm other things which then sustain your people and not focus on monocultural crops, right? Because of all of these reasons, because we think that we win all of these clashes within this debate, with a minor principle on opposition, you give the win to side proposition.